Okay, hello everybody. Welcome, those of you who are joining us on the Unify Network. My name is Samsara, and we are here with the Soulmatique Intelligence channel on Unify. If you are joining us for this live stream today, can you comment down on the box below and let us know where you are chiming in from so we can see where our global family is at today? For those of you that are new to this part of the channel of Unify, Soulmatique Intelligence is a live stream platform that helps you connect back to movement and also adapt to change by embodying change. So those of you that have participated with us in here, you've seen us in yoga classes, dance classes, meditation, practices of stillness, and even martial arts. So we're happy to have another facet of movement or talking about movement today called Living Tantra. Our featured facilitator here is Halo Soronko, and she is a classical Tantra facilitator. And
I think you just froze, Samsara.
Temple of Shakti.
Okay.
So if this is of resonance to you, um, stay tuned and check it out. So without further ado, we have Halo here to take on the spotlight.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Samsara. Um, just as an aside, you froze for a minute, so I don't know. We might have a little bit of technical things, but we'll see what happens. So, first of all, I just want to say I'm really honored to be here, and thank you so much, Sarah, for the invitation. Thank you to Unify. And I've actually been featured with Soulmatique Intelligence before as a dance teacher, because that's one of my great loves and passions in this life. And I'm here today to go down a little bit of a different road with you all, and what I'm really excited to share about. So I am the founder of a international and online school called Shakti Temple Arts. And Shakti Temple Arts is essentially a school of what I call feminine embodied awakening, which is very much where the piece of the practice of classical Tantra comes from. And I'm going to unpack a little bit. You're good? Okay. I'm going to unpack a little bit about what exactly Living Tantra is to me, and I'm going to take you on a little journey from and through my own story and what led me to where I am today, and how my experience of Living Tantra came to be, and what that looks like as I share that, as I teach that, because it's a really, it's a deep path. It's not what many Westerners think it is. And so we're going to get into kind of the roots, the depth, and how we can apply that into our daily lives for more meaning, for more purpose, for just this richness and this divine love play that life is meant to be. And I'm very passionate about that, and bringing in these different modalities of embodiment and consciousness, right? Because those both have to go together, and that's very much at the root of Tantra, is that it's not just, we're not negating the body for the sake of consciousness, nor are we negating consciousness for the whims of the body. It's a marriage, right? So I want to share a little bit about my journey into discovering, going into the deeper and deeper layers of that marriage, what some of the modalities I found were, and specifically my experiences of going into India and how that resulted in the birth of Shakti Temple Arts and the initiations I lead into the path of Living Tantra. So I want to invite anyone who's here with us, if you have any questions along the way, Samsara is going to be tracking those in the comments, and I will get to those near the end. So you're just welcome to go into the chat. Again, as Samsara said, you can just say hi, let us know where you're coming from. That's always fun to feel that global network as we explore these topics. And feel free, like I said, to ask any questions into the chat that might arise or any aha moments. We'd love to have this be as interactive as possible. So what is Living Tantra? So Tantra, I'm going to kind of give an overview before I go into my story. So Tantra in the West is, commonly boiled down to sacred sexuality, to intimacy and relationships, to our sensual experience of life, which is very accurate in also connecting to the traditional or classical Tantra system. But classical Tantra is Tantra from India, right? And it's actually very different. And I was very much one of those people. I was a young woman and I was bursting with passion and desire and this, zest for life. And so I found Tantra in the Western view of things and just felt like I'd found gold mine and something that spoke to something deep in my soul. A level of intimacy that I'd always known was possible, but it had only glimpse of that sense of union that I'd experienced through my sensuality. And so that led me, along with my experience of a dancer, to journeying to India for the first time. And that is where the layers of classical Tantra, that initial spark, that initial gateway of what I call Neo-Tantra, led me into the deeper layers of what that is traditionally and rooted in its birth, its motherland of India. So what drew me to India to begin with, I was a dancer. And I just started kind of taking my dance to a more professional level. Before that, I was really into ecstatic dance and just had this deep connection. I think so many of us find this through dance. Dance is a common modality of communion with spirit in many different cultures, many different traditions, all across the world. So there's something there. It's like dance connects the human spirit with the human body. It gets us beyond the, sometimes tangled territory of the mind and into that direct experience of divinity. It really is a bridge for that. And so that was kind of my entry point with dance, but then I got really interested in studying traditional dance forms and, the dances that had been created, in these certain cultural contexts, especially ones that had to do with dance as a sacred offering, as a sacred experience of embodiment. So that spark of desire and of wanting to go deeper and wanting to explore, it was like I feel like I found this thread and I started pulling on it and realized it was part of this massive tapestry. So that's what drew me to India, and my initial intention was to follow the kind of the Silk Road and study different dance forms and even kind of follow, this term isn't really looked highly upon anymore, but it was once called the Gypsy Trail that went all the way from India, from Rajasthan specifically, through the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and all the way to Spain. And there's an amazing movie as I was getting really into traditional dance forms, and you can find it to this day on YouTube. I highly recommend it. It's called Lachodrome, and it follows just through music and dance. There's no narration or anything. It's a visual, experiential documentary that goes through that whole trail from Rajasthan to Spain and follows the traditional music and dance, and you can really see the thread all the way, the connection between like flamenco and Rajasthani music and dance, and specifically Kalbelia. So I saw that film and I was like, I'm gonna do this. But I got to India and I fell so in love. I actually went there to study Odissi, which is a classical Indian dance form. It's not an acronym, by the way. Odissi. It's pronounced Odissi. It's a classical Indian dance from the temples of East India. So when it was in the temples, it wasn't a classical dance. It was a temple dance, right? It was a devotional offering by these women named Devadasis, or servants of God. They would be actually married to the temple deity, and they would perform the dance as an offering daily, maybe even multiple times a day. There's whole books about their rituals. So the dance is very different now. It's been codified, it's been made into a classical art form, but those are its roots. And something about that, there was like a remembrance for me, and that was what got me on the plane to India when I was 24, was to go and study this dance. So I'd already had these kind of breadcrumbs. It was like discovering the sacredness of communion with, between form and formless through dance, through the expression of dance, and then finding that there is in this world an actual dance form that came out of these temples where that's what was done. And this wasn't just in India, this was in ancient Greece, I think ancient Egypt as well, probably many other different places. So this was a whole era, a whole time period. But the most recent place where this tradition was still alive is India. It actually only died out within the last, I guess I'd say century, but maybe even as soon as just like 50 years ago, something like this. So that piqued something in me, along with my discovery of Tantra. I was already really into yoga, so the threads were there, but at that point they were very much, in a way physically based. I thought yoga was just asana. I thought Tantra was sacred sex and sexuality, relationship, intimacy. I had that experience of dance, but I didn't, there were deeper layers. And what, over many different trips to India, many different experiences, what I started to realize is that yoga, tantra, the classical dance, everything was so enmeshed, and they're enmeshed with the temple culture in India. They're enmeshed with the deities of the Pantheon there. And so my first trip to India, I'll share a little bit about that, because that was really the beginnings of this whole unfolding, which led to Shakti temple arts being birthed, which led to initiations like Temple of Shakti that is coming up, and this kind of initiation into the path of living Tantra, where my intention is to recreate those pieces that completely transformed my entire view and experience of life for other people to come into and experience, maybe without having to travel all the way to India, although I do highly recommend that. So I go to India, 24 years old. I was very young. Back then I had I was very, what's the word? I was like quasi-feral. I had a dread mullet, which means short hair on top and long dreads in the back, for reals. And I was, largely clueless. I had some idea of what I was getting into, but you really, India's, it's like the extremes, right? It's like the U.S. I'm from California, or Idaho originally, but I live in California. So it's like the U.S. and India, and they couldn't be more different in pretty much every way. It's an alternate reality. But I landed in that alternate reality, and something felt like home to me. It was like, I know this place. And I remember my first day in India, and I've heard a lot of other Westerners who've traveled to India say the same thing, but it was almost like a psychedelic experience, because the sensory Many people call it overload, but I just ate it up. I loved it. It's immediate, right? And I just remember going from Delhi, where I flew in. I was on my way to Pushkar, Rajasthan, to study at this amazing woman, Kalina Shakti's school in Pushkar, Rajasthan, called Shakti School of Dance. And I remember going through Jaipur, and it was during the kite festival. So Jaipur is a pink city in Rajasthan, and so we went right through the old town. All the buildings are painted pink, and the streets are just full. And if you've ever been to Rajasthan or even seen Bollywood movies or photos, like, there's just so much color. It's so different. At the time I lived in the Bay Area, and it was really, everyone was wearing black, and so here I am in India, and it's just like every color, bright, and all these patterns, kind of like what I'm wearing now is actually a upcycled sari from a friend of mine's company. So, just bright and colorful and patterns. And I just remember, just looking right to left, like, oh, I remember seeing a fort in the middle of a lake, and elephants like walking around that were painted with neon colors and designs, and camels that had designs shaved into them and wearing all these beautiful ornaments. And the kites from the kite festival, there were just like hundreds of kites, all different colors in the air, and it was just something, obviously I was coming in with a Westerner's eyes. I was coming in with eyes that hadn't experienced that. If you live in India, of course, that's your reality. You're used to that. And so, but for me, it was just so mystical, so unique. I mean, it was just, what it felt like going there is this carefully constructed veil we have in the West was just lifted, and the magical nature of the flow of life was being revealed before me in every unfolding moment. And that was just my first day in India. That was already starting to happen and transform me in a way. For me, it was a remembrance. It was like, this is life. This is the pulse of life. And in some ways in the West, we kind of start to condense that, and I don't know exactly how to say this, but we put a lot of bumpers around that full experience of life. And as I've gone deeper into the path of classical Tantra, I've realized that a lot of those bumpers have to do with fear. And this idea that we can have this kind of, when we really look at the core of it, false sense of safety. But what that ends up doing is it cuts off a certain flow of the life force, of Shakti, we call it. Shakti is the goddess, she has many different forms, but that's the essential name of the goddess, or the energy, the power within the Tantric viewpoint. So Shakti was just, it was like, before, she was unfolding before my eyes. She always is unfolding before our eyes, but that it's very tangible in India in a different way. So I make it to the school, and the school was in this gorgeous temple ground, and the dance was beautiful. So fast forward, I'm now, I start going to India every year, and some of the experiences that I had, just simple things like this. Simple but not simple, right? I remember just waking up in the mornings, and I got really into wearing the kajal, which is like, it's like kohl. It's made out of ghee and charcoal and herbs, and so painting my eyes, and this idea of like the love play, especially studying the dance, this love play between form and formless, which is, in my experience and view, kind of the highest aspect of Tantra. And even in Neo-Tantra, this is what we're trying to touch within, personal, intimate, human-to-human relationship. Kind of the highest form of relationship is that between human and divine. And as we go deeper and deeper, as we practice more and more, the gap between human and divine gets smaller and smaller, until we are infused, until we recognize ourselves as that, and in doing so recognize everything else as that. This is a tangent, but how do we live our lives? How do we walk each day? How do we greet our beloveds? How do we greet a stranger on the street, or an animal, or even a plant, when we realize what it actually is at its core? So I was just immersed in this love play. And I would paint, put the kajal on my eyes, and put on my bindi, and wrap my practice sari. In this dance form, we wear like a shorter sari because it's easier to dance in. But let's tie the sari, and just even the motion of how that goes, and the care that needs to be put in so it looks nice, especially as a Westerner, it takes some practice. But just going through that whole process, and then I would hear like the bells from the different temples, and morning prayers starting to happen around the lake, and I would leave my, my little guest house that I was staying in once I was ready, and go and get, the early morning chai. Only a few stalls would be open, and to have that warm, sweet, rich, chai first thing. And then I'd go to the flower wala, who's selling these beautiful garlands of roses that are grown just out of town. Another tangent, I remember one time I was staying further out of town, one of my trips there, and walking to school, I'm walking through this rose garden, and there are peacocks in the rose garden, and it was just, just a simple thing. I'm just, in my head walking, and I look over, and it's just all of a sudden my heart is exploded by the beauty of what I'm seeing, by the richness of what I am experiencing. So walking in, and then buying the flower garlands, and then walking in through the temple gates, seeing the temple, and receiving the smiles of the town waking up, and there's just this sweetness to the whole experience, and this thickness, right? It's so beautiful that you can't help but be present. Like for that whole walk, for every little experience along the way, walking in the temple gates, walking up the steps to the classroom, walking in the door and hearing, the morning puja happening. The puja is the ritual offerings, which we'll talk a little more about in a moment. And the incense, the smell of the incense, and then offering the flowers onto the altar, and feeling the cold marble floor under my feet, and then going into the devotional dance to the sound of the live drum. And there's just nothing like it. It was some of the most magical years of my life, spent going to India, and then beyond that going on pilgrimage to different temples, and being part of the pujas, where you see just this beautiful tapestry of offerings, from obviously the flowers and the incense, and it's just the mantras, it's such a tactile, sensual experience, all of it, and it's all done in devotion of closing that gap between our humanity and divinity, until we really actually realize that, again, we are divine. It takes time. It's a layer by layer process. So one of the other things that happened and kind of set the stage for many of my future trips in India is when I was in Pushkar that first time, I found this little hole-in-the-wall bookstore. And India has the most amazing bookstores. I mean, obviously you have to be into, all the yogic texts and all that. But for me, it was immediately I walked into the bookstore and was like, gosh, I want to read every book. So I bought a number of books on Tantra. One of them being David Frawley. He's an amazing Western scholar, but a really, he's Westerner, but he's very connected to the traditions, keeps things very clear and accurate, and he's just an amazing kind of translator between East and West, I think. So I found his book called Tantra Yoga and the Wisdom Goddesses. And I still have the same book to this day. That was over 10 years ago. And I've read it. I'm not one to read books over and over again, but this one I've probably read like 3 or 4 times. And even recently I'm feeling like, I think I'm going to read that again. But it gave me, before I had this idea of deities, and I think this happens a lot in the West, that we'll like kind of find deities from other cultures that we resonate with or we like, and then there's this idea that we embody them and do this whole thing. And there's a truth to that, but there's also, it becomes more of the game than the real juice, the real direct relationship. There's a way, and my teacher says this and I love it, that we have to, it's like a courting or a romantic process. If we're dating somebody, we want to, we're not merged yet. There's a process of getting closer and closer, of getting to know the person, of, being generous towards that person. And so it's actually really important that we start with a relationship with the deities. Deities being some examples would be Lakshmi, Saraswati, Kali, Durga, Shiva, Krishna, this kind of thing. So we slowly start to get closer, but it's actually really important that we start with that, again, that space, that gap between myself and them. At the highest levels, we are them, right? But we have to slowly get there. And that's where that beautiful tension and that beautiful desire, right? Another tangent. I have a lot of tangents. Shakti doesn't work in necessarily a linear way, so we're just going to kind of flow through. But when I went to India that first time, I was also going through a heartbreak. And so what that did that was so beautiful is it took, like, my heart, I was just broken, the human to human relationship had kind of shattered me. And so I took that, and I like to think of it as like the lasso of my heart, and I swung it towards something higher, something greater, something that could never leave me. And that was the divine. I'm thinking like of Rumi and Hafez, and that just longing to be close to the beloved. And that trip, the beloved became Shiva. Like I had this really strong connection to Lord Shiva. And I wasn't sure what that was. Later on, I came to understand, there's many different aspects to Shiva, but he is supreme consciousness. And there's this way that we long to understand our true nature. And so I realize now, I'm like, that was my longing to understand my true nature, which is wholeness, which can't be broken by a heartbreak. Or in fact, some ways heartbreak can bring us closer to that. So that was another piece of the context of this whole experience for me. And so I found this book, and I just fell in love with the goddesses within it, this was my first kind of opening my mind from what I thought Tantra was to what it actually was. And there were a couple other books that I read, and then I got really into, I'm going to call it the Hindu Pantheon, but I struggle with that because Hinduism was not a religion to begin with. It was I would say a spirituality. It was not kind of indoctrinated, and that was something that I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe happened with the occupation of the British, was to, they called them, these are the Hindus, because they liked to understand things and label things and keep them tidy. So I don't love calling it the Hindu Pantheon because it predates that idea of Hinduism, but for lack of a better way to say what it is, I fell in love with the Hindu Pantheon and the, not this like there's one God and it's like this, I feel the Hindu Pantheon gives us this opportunity to find the face of God, to find the face of the divine that really speaks to us, because we have to have that devotion. And devotion is so palpable within the spirituality of Tantra, within the different factors of Hinduism. There's different branches, just like there is with Christianity. So I started going to temples, and this became, as much as I would go to India to study dance, I've also studied yoga, and then I'll get to my more wild experiences of studying classical tantra. Uh, but I also, every trip I would go on different pilgrimages, mostly to temples of the goddess of Shakti in various faces and forms. And so, just this idea, we don't really have this idea of pilgrimage, or what they call yatra in India, in Sanskrit. So, the idea of pilgrimage is that we're putting forth some effort to connect to the divine, right? And I found this in my dance. My dance became this like offering to, like me saying, like I said in that idea of romantic relationship, I want to be closer to you. I want to feel you in every cell. I want to know you in every moment, right? So the dance was that offering. And then going to the temples. And I remember at first going, and I was kind of clueless since I was more like a spectator, and I didn't bring an offering, and I didn't, I was just curious. Something drew me. But after a while, I just, through observing what locals were doing, and then having a really powerful experience in a Durga temple where I really felt her in a very, very strong way, very palpable. All of a sudden, it's like I would never go to a temple without offerings, and I'd always, go to they have little stalls that have the offerings. I'd always buy like the nicest flowers I could find, and, really go in with that, like, not asking for a thing, not asking for, will you give me like the perfect husband or whatever, but just, I want to know you, like, show yourself to me. That was always my prayer. So, all of that said, that whole story, at this point I've spent, over several trips. I would go and come back, but I'd spend time there because that's what it takes to study anything anything in the East, honestly. It takes time. And so I would, over time, I think I spent about 3 years in India just absorbing like a sponge everything I could learn about this and that, and even studying a little Sanskrit. And when it came to classical tantra, I started, I would just pick up a thread. I really wanted a teacher, so I'd like go to this ashram that I heard about in this roundabout way, or I'd go find this Baba in the Himalayas and hear what he had to say, or I'd, it was, I'd hear about this massive yagya or fire ceremony that was happening for multiple days, and I'd go there, and obviously with the temples, and so it just turned into this whole thing. I don't even, what do I even say about it? I'm just gonna check the chat. Oh yes, I can project my voice a bit, thank you. Yeah, actually, and I can also bring the mic closer. Hopefully that helps a little bit. So that became, I feel like there's this cauldron that I was being stirred in with all these different aspects to it. And some years ago, also back home, I was lucky enough to be in a community where there were other dancers. And so we were created a sacred dance troupe and would do these session, like live, kind of more ritualistic performances, and, created a home temple space where we were kind of, using that muse of what was that Devadasi tradition, that temple dance tradition, and, making the offerings at the altar. And my whole life, internally, externally, everything started to shift for me. And I never entered into any of these streams with the intention that I was going to be a teacher at some point. I was following this thread of passion, of desire, of, beauty. And at the core of Tantra, I think, is beauty. Beauty forces us into presence. Beauty invites us into that marriage of embodiment and consciousness. The five senses, what I realized when I'm in India, especially, it's possible anywhere, especially in nature, these experiences of exquisite beauty, but the five senses are not meant to be something that draws us out seeking, I must have this and that to be whole and happy. But the five senses are meant to bring us into that singularity within us where we know ourselves as whole, as divine, as that, right? Where we realize that we are the deities. We are this great energy. We are a part of something amazing, and we each have, an individual and beautiful role to play. And I like to think of it as we each have our own flower to offer at the feet of this something greater, of the divine. So all of that inspired me, and I started taking, Tantra yoga and bringing that into my teachings. I also have a background in the Taoist system, so that came in. Obviously, the dance was a huge, central pillar, and still is to this day. And then more and more, I started teaching Tantra. And we'll get to questions in just a moment. So when I got into Tantra, I'm just going to do a little time check. What I learned is that it is, contrary to, again, Western belief, it's a very secretive system, and it is so for a reason. There's an intelligence with that because it's very powerful, and it works very specifically with our karmas, and particularly those that are kind of keeping us bound so that we can't expand into the true nature of who we are, right? We have all these mechanisms, our patterns, our obstructions, certain mindsets that keep us separate from that, right? So what we're asking when, like, let's say we are at a temple and we're making offerings to, let's say it's Durga, one of those offerings can be like, help me with, this thing that gets in the way of me really knowing you, and so Tantra but that's not always easy territory for us. So I learned that, without certain proper initiations, certain mantras weren't, safe to just share openly and all of this. So I was like in this inquiry around, well, I really want to share like the juice, like that singularity, the experience of that devotion. How can I share this in a way that is coherent with the classical tradition, but that can still allow people to come into this experience, to taste this? And so that's when I came up with the idea of Living Tantra, where we can take the principles, the philosophy of classical Tantra. We can take a lot from the yogic system, which is accessible. We can take, mantras to use in devotional practice that are considered unlocked, which means they don't need to have like a guru or a certain caliber of teacher to transmit them for them to be used. They're considered safe and open and have benefit for everybody. And so the more I studied, the more I collected like what could be shared and what, created this whole body of work, Shakti Temple Arts being that could allow people to come in using the dance, even using some of the Taoist teachings, which is a separate system, but they're very cohesive together. And there's certain teachings in the Taoist system that are more accessible, especially when it comes to working with sexual energy. The teachings in classical Tantra are actually you have to be very high level before you receive those. So the Taoist system, I found a good way to address that, because we do have to address that to get there, right? We all have kind of, that's a place we all need a lot of clarification. So, and then bringing in the yogic lens, and the overarching lens of Tantra. So with all of that, this is where I birthed, several different online courses, which are all evergreen, but more importantly, because it takes time to really start to integrate and embody these different tools, I created a longer 6-month initiation called Temple of Shakti, where it's really like bringing, my students and myself included, because it's a spiral journey. It keeps going into this direct experience, right? And I call it kind of, the path of living Tantra, but also the path of the Shakti priestess, because the priestess is one who is in service to that something greater. And in this lens, it's kind of like the goddess is the manifestation of everything. So how do we walk when we are serving that? How do we walk the path of living Tantra as the Shakti priestess? So we'll talk a little bit more about Temple of Shakti, because the next round of that's coming up. But I do want to take any questions, and then we're going to end today with a little short taste of an embodied experience.
Amazing. We have a comment from one of our viewers here that is asking, what is the most important thing Tantra taught you about yourself, and how did it grow you as a woman?
That is an amazing question.
I know.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to hearing.
Oh gosh, and that's also, it's like I have to take a funnel and distill, because there's so much that I could say to that. But what's the most important piece? I think the greatest piece I have gotten, this is going to sound so simple, but it's not. The greatest piece I have gotten from Tantra is to keep going, no matter what. When we get into the deeper levels of tantric practice as per the classical systems, we're doing a lot of what's called sadhana, which is like daily disciplined practice. And the kind of the first stages are purification, which is not always so much fun. It's like it's an alchemical practice. It's a spiritual science, really. You can't just call Tantra spiritual. It's a very complex, when I think of science, it's tried and true, there's like peer review and testing, and Tantra's had that for, I don't know, thousands of years, right? It gets results. It gets them quickly. But there's a way that we have to, to know our wholeness, we have to face all of ourselves. And that there's parts of ourselves for all of us, I don't think any of us are excluded from this, that are more difficult for us to see, to look at, and to integrate. And so yeah, I think that one of the like core pieces I've gotten from Tantra is to keep going, right? There's always something next. There's always something on the other side, and we just keep going, and we pay attention to those breadcrumbs, because when we do start to have a relationship with the divine in whatever form speaks to us, they're whispering to us, they're dropping breadcrumbs, they're even potentially putting just the perfect obstacles in our way for us to overcome, to be on that path of liberation. So yeah, I've really learned to just keep going even if things are difficult, and to, really enjoy and rest in those moments when life is not difficult, and not to complicate things or make things difficult when they don't need to be. So that's one of the big pieces. And then how it's transformed me as a woman. Well, I wish I had a photo of the dread mullet 24-year-old going to India, because I wouldn't need to say anything, you'd just see. But if I were to say how it's transformed me, I've really refined on every level, and there's a way, I think one of the real gifts that I've gotten from Tantra, and this comes back to how Tantra works specifically with our karmas. Now, this is like, I'd have to get so deep into this. It's another conversation for another time. We talk about it in Temple of Shakti, by the way. where we have this idea in the West of karma as being generally a bad thing, right? It's like I did something horrible in a past life and that's why this horrible thing happened to me now. But karma just means it's action, it's cause and effect. So one of the examples I like to give is when we cook food, right? It's like we're taking raw food and now we're cooking it, and because we put the noodles in the hot boiling water and waited however many minutes, now we have, edible pasta. It wasn't edible before, now it is. That is karma. It's just literally I did this and then I did that and it had this result. So, we're looking to get beyond the idea of duality, good or bad, because we never know. Sometimes bad things happen to people and then they become some of the hugest voices of change. I mean, we can see this over and over again. Martin Luther King, Gandhi, there's so many examples of people where it was actually difficult things that happened that, gave them these certain powerful karmas at the end of the day. So it's not that simple. But what I've learned and what I continue to experience is as I go deeper and my karmas start to resolve and some of the more binding ones start to loosen up, I'm way more aware in my speech. I'm more aware in my actions. I'm more aware of my impact, the space around me, on my impact to myself internally, on my impact to my beloved ones. And there's a greater capacity to walk in a really clean way that doesn't create more sticky karmas, right? Because our goal here is liberation. And what is liberation at the end of the day? We don't even have to think of it as like, oh, I'm going towards being enlightened. Like, that would be nice, but that feels far off. But if we think of liberation, we can have little liberations every day. I had a habit and I chose not to do it today. Like, real freedom is just being able to make a different choice than our habitual choices, right? And so it really, I think that's the greatest transformation, is just I'm learning to walk this life with more awareness and therefore create more beauty in my relationships, in my environment, inside of myself. That's priceless. I don't think I need to say anything more. And I'm still going, I'm not like there. I'm not, but it's an unfolding layer by layer, petal by petal. Okay, we have another question. I would love to take more.
Amazing. We have a question from Jared Wright, who is from Salt Lake City. He wanted to know, did you also learn what these secret practices are, and what was the process to get there?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I said this before about how Shakti works. She weaves in mysterious ways, and it's certainly not linear, which can be very challenging for the Western mind. In our minds, it's like, I want something, so I just go and I get it, right? Easy. We've really created our whole society around that kind of thing. That aspect of our conditioning just really struggles when we go over, to not just India, but the East in general, because it's a whole different approach, totally different. I mean, something that always makes me laugh, I remember myself, my first trip to India, and how impatient I would get, like at a restaurant waiting for food. Little things, waiting in line for this or that, or just everything moves in a different way there, and when we're not used to. So now it always makes me laugh when I go back and I see the new the fresh meat in India that's not used to it, how they just get so like irate that things aren't just like that. They can't just be like, I want this, and then it happens. Now that is even more true when it comes to their deepest jewels. And it should be that way, right? And these are some of their deepest jewels. So the answer is yes. I have had the very good fortune of entering into some of those more secretive practices, and some that are very secretive. And how that happened, it took years, first of all. it was a certain karma, you know, we'll either have that karma or not. But the best advice I can give, if you feel that pull, because that's the first step, is just that there is that, like, what's here, and we see the thread and we start pulling, you know, like I said before, until more and more starts to reveal. But we have to, it's almost like the teachings won't come to you until you're ready. And one of the really important things that I realized about myself is when I was younger and more naive, had I received some of these teachings, I would have abused that privilege out of my own ignorance. And the teachings, you know, I got, like, teachings were coming all the way since that first trip to India, even before, I would say. But the lineage really didn't open for me until I had established a certain level of maturity and true understanding. You know, the teachings themselves are intelligent, and they'll protect themselves. And then all of a sudden, when you're ready, the door will open, the teacher will come. I spent a lot of time seeking a teacher, you know, like I said, I'd go to the Himalayas to meet this Baba that I heard about or just saw a photo of, and I was constantly kind of following that pull, and that is part of it. We do need to follow that pull, and then our intuition plays a big part of it. I had to, you know, step out of my comfort zone a lot, but I think the most important is just to follow the little breadcrumbs that do come, understand it's not a linear path, and the rest is, it's up to that greater force. And when we approach with devotion and not from a, like, I want something, I want to take something, I want to have something, which, you know, this isn't a way of shaming. We all have that, and especially as Westerners, I had to really decondition that, and until it was really from a pure place. And that was when, and not only did the doors open at that point for me, it was like a floodgate. It was like all of this was there waiting for me, but, like, the divine was like, nope, I'm keeping the trapdoors closed. And then whoosh, it just opened. So that does happen, and I think the best thing we can do is keep going. Like I said, follow those breadcrumbs, be grateful for the pieces that are coming, and with devotion and a sincere heart and seeking and overcoming those parts of us that want to take something, own something, blah, 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 just really getting that, you know, having the intention be of that highest order. All right, are there any other questions?
Yes, we do have one more. We were also curious in learning about what is the difference. There's so many offerings of tantra teachings that are out there, but what is the difference between what you're teaching in classical tantra versus what we see as neo tantra, and why is it important to understand and learn about classical tantra?
Yeah, absolutely. That's also an amazing question. So, to be honest, the systems are so different. It's so different. And there are, I think, what is accurate within Neo-Tantra as far as classical Tantra is concerned is that, you know, Tantra is a path of relationship. It is a path of embodiment. Like I said before, we're not negating the body and its functions, whether that's sex or food or pooping or, you know, it doesn't matter. All of it's part of it, right? There's nothing that's not part of it. And it being this divine Leela, this divine play of consciousness and energy, which in Tantra we call Shiva and Shakti. But what happens in Neo-Tantra is, what I see often is taking kind of the philosophy of Tantra and then kind of diluting it, right? To where there's like a premature, like, you know, like the man is Shiva and the woman is Shakti, and there's a power to this. You know, there's a practice that I learned and I do teach because I find it to be helpful, of transfiguration, where, you know, you're sitting with a partner and the woman really connects to the energy of Shakti, the man to Shiva, or vice versa. I mean, it can look in many different ways. But at the end of the day, Neo-Tantra really fixates on the polarity, on, like masculine, feminine, na na na, and especially nowadays we're realizing that those are more fluid than we thought. And the way I personally see it is that, yes, there are two poles, right? And the poles create that dynamic tension between them, but there's a whole spectrum in between, and Shakti wouldn't have it any other way. Like, she is the diversity. And even though I'm saying she, we're going to get to that in a minute, she's all about like every flavor of the rainbow, every, color of the rainbow, every flavor of the whatever. So when we go into classical tantra, our minds don't, they have a mechanism that's very black or white, that's very good, bad, day, night, man, woman, this, that, it's just part of, that's how we're wired. And so instead of fighting that and trying to get somewhere that takes practice, Tantra says, well, we're going to use duality, but we're going to use duality to recognize unity, that singularity again. Like, all the diversity is leading us actually to the singularity. And that singularity, you could call it the union of Shiva and Shakti, but at the end of the day, you can get there through either Shiva or Shakti. You can get there through any deity. But what we realize at the end of the day is Shiva is Shakti. Shakti is Shiva. We all have both, and there's only one, right? So it's this divine paradox. And I think Neo-Tantra vastly simplifies it all. So on a very practical level, in Neo-Tantra, we're looking at, a lot of kind of sexual practices. We're looking at, partnered, practices in relationship, breathing together, eye gazing, this kind of thing. It's all beautiful. And to be honest, I still teach some of the practices I learned in the school I studied. I studied at a school that was like Neo-Tantra but had a very traditional basis. I'm really grateful for that. But there were definitely, I think, some liberties taken there also. So those are a lot of the practices we see in Neo-Tantra, right? And what most people honestly think Tantra is, right? They stop there. They don't look further. And to be honest, I have some, I really think it's important that we at least use the suffix neo, or the prefix neo, because we need to specify that it's different. And to be honest, it would be accurate and good in certain ways that we even stopped using the word tantra, because it's such a thing these days. I still use it, but I really specify that it's neo, because in the classical system of tantra, what tantra means, or what tantra is, the word tantra, first of all, came from a series of texts called the Tantras. And within the Tantras are the whole systems of Tantra. Now, within Tantra, there are multiple different streams, lineage streams. There's Kashmir Shaivism, which has a, kind of Shiva is the driving force, but Shakti is always there. And then there's Sri Vidya, which is the system. I've actually been trained in both systems, but at this point I'm more following Sri Vidya. But even within that, there's different lineages. There's some that have Kali at the forefront. There's some that have the deity called Lalita Tripura Sundari at the forefront. So one of the what practice looks like in Tantra. So the Tantras, these texts, have all of the, practices, the different lineages, practices for the different deities, etc. within them. They're all in Sanskrit, of course. And what Tantra means, so it's from two different Sanskrit words, Tanoti and Trayati. Tanoti, I believe, meaning to expand, and specifically expand in the arena of our consciousness. So this is kind of the Shiva principle. Then Trayati means to liberate, and to liberate our energy, which is kind of pertaining to the Shakti principle. So the whole system of classical Tantra, sex is not the goal, period, end of story. It's included in a certain way. But there are lineages of Tantra that people are abstinent within, right? They're sublimating all of that energy towards that final goal, right? Larger goal. But our goal, period, with classical Tantra is the expansion of our consciousness, the liberation of our energy, our true freedom, right? Our ability to make conscious movements, choices, speech, to really be the full flower of humanity, right? So the series of practices within Tantra, first of all, the practice always, well, there are support practices that don't directly involve a deity, but the main practices always involve a deity, always, right? And the practices involve a lot of mantra, Sanskrit mantra. So you're chanting a lot, you are making offerings, and the offerings have to do with the 5 elements. I go into all of this in my courses, and especially in the upcoming Temple of Shakti, we have a whole module about the offerings and elements and how we can use those in our internal and external space. Sometimes there's puja. Puja oftentimes has to do with those offerings, but you're also using mantra. You're combining all the elements. It's external, so some practice is all internal, some practice is external. The deities, this is going really deep, but the deities work, they have their 2 primary tools are mantra and yantra. Yantra is like I think most often people are familiar with the Sri Yantra, so it's like a sacred geometry, but it's actually representing the light body of the deity, and the mantra represents the sound body. So those are 2 of the main tools we use. Like one of my gurus said, mantra and yantra equals tantra. So if you don't have those, I'm sorry, but you're not doing tantra. And if you're doing that haphazardly without actually knowing, like I said, it's a science. So we don't want to go in and to a chemistry lab and grab this and that and see what happens. We want someone to be like, here's the formula. Otherwise you might blow some SHIT up. So it's real with Tantra. You can do that. So it's good that you have a guide, and then there are certain things that are more open, and that's what I teach. I'm not at this stage guiding people into those deeper layers, but I do some practices specifically with Goddess Durga, some of the more accessible deities where we do work with the mantra and the yantra and do all of that. So I hope that answers your question. They're very, very different. And like I said, there are actually in the left-handed path of Tantra, there's like left and right hand. The right hand is like the clean path where a lot of that, taboo stuff is not included, or it's purely internal, solo. And then there's the left-handed path where it's like some of the taboo pieces are included, including alcohol and meat, which, in Hindu culture is not, like strict Hindus don't eat meat. They're vegetarians. So, and then that will also involve sexual practices. But what we want to understand is it's not about the pleasure. It's actually using that energy to catapult towards that expansion and liberation, and it's very secretive. It's usually reserved only for high-level practitioners, and the aim is really different. I mean, there's all these, like, one teacher I had wouldn't teach anyone those practices unless they were like literally married, because then you're consensually sharing karmas with the partner, right? Or with some of the really high-level tantric practitioners, it would only be with what would be considered a consort. So you would almost have to have like no established relationship, and you'd both have to be practitioners and of a high level so that the karmas didn't mix. Okay, we're going deep. But people are always interested in that stuff. So I thought I'd share it. Okay, are there any other questions?
Amazing, Halo. We are getting so many great comments and just beautiful, amazing people who are just like astounded by what you're talking about. Beautiful explanations is what they're saying.
Oh, so. Thanks. I'm gonna have to go into the group because I don't actually see anyone's comments.
Yeah. Yes.
I'll go
Well,
back and answer anything. Or, yeah.
wonderful. Let's dive a little bit deep into Temple of Shakti and what this
Yes.
container, this space is, and how participants and viewers who are here on Unify can learn more.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I shared over the years, I created different online courses. I've run different programs online as well as international retreats and kind of local to my area. I'm in the Bay Area of California. So I do some things, here as well. Not as much during these strange years, but that'll be picking up again soon. So my, COVID actually gave me the opportunity to really sit with a new format for bringing these teachings to people. And so I do work at this point, I work predominantly with people who identify as women, and the reason behind that is just that that's where most of my expertise has been. In the future, I will be opening more to the full spectrum, but at this point, that's where it stands. And so my latest offering, one that came through during the very beginnings of COVID, is called Temple of Shakti, and it's a 6-month, what I'm calling a mentorship program. It's so much more than that because, as you might hear from my talk, I'm more of a teacher per se than like a coach or a mentor. But I do really see how like these different aspects of our lives, like how do we bring this idea of living Tantra and the Shakti priestess into these different aspects of our lives. So I created a program that kind of goes from the best, like the base, like the first module or the first month, we're focusing on sacred space and self-care practices, which, we hear a lot of this in the spiritual community, but the difference is that we're really taking the lens of living Tantra here. So when creating sacred space, we're creating relationship with the elements. How do we bring those into our space? What are the 5 elemental, traditional 5 elemental offerings? How do we become allies with the elements, which are the building blocks of Shakti, of creation? And then in the self-care practices, we are looking at some practices that come out of yoga, Ayurveda, and then I'm bringing in a lot from the Taoist system as well, which is my home. That was my first spiritual tradition that I studied and practiced in via my father. So a lot of that comes with me wherever I go. So, and we go from there. You can see, I'm not going to go through all the months, but we have a different theme each month that has to do with those pieces. We do have a full month on what I call sacred cycles and enlightened sensuality. So we are touching on that for an entire month. And then the other really special thing, so this is all live because I'm a big fan of live transmission, although I do record all the calls because it's hard for people to make, there's a lot, it's a lot of calls with me. So we have 2 calls a month for 6 months, and then there's also 3 class series included, which I think is really special because you get to really have an experience of the 3, what I call the 3 gates of Shakti temple arts, which are the first class series is Jade Temple, where we're actually going into the traditional Taoist practices. So you get a whole 6 weeks, just 1 class a week, where we get to go into some of the Taoist sexual energy cultivation practices, and for women specifically, and so we do have that piece covered. And then we have a 6-week, what I call Shakti Temple Dance series, and this is a dance modality that I created that blends a lot of Eastern dance traditions, from Central Asian dance, Middle Eastern dance, as well as classical Indian dance. And so we're going to kind of get to play in those realms, and it's codified dance, but we're really touching into that dance as an offering and a means of communion between form and formless. And then the last class series that's included is a Tantra Yoga class series. And what's different about Tantra Yoga from what you probably, go and experience in your, yoga class on the corner or whatever it is. There are more and more teachers, I think, that are bringing in the deeper aspects of yoga, but we're going into the energetics. We're also going to be doing asana, but with a focus on which chakra the asana is supporting, different pranayamas we can use for different, which is breath practice for different movements of energy in the body, bringing mantra into the practices, having a really solid invocation. I teach a full, a bunch of prayers. They're separate mantras, but we string them together in this very particular way. So we're honoring Shakti, we're honoring Shiva, we're honoring the union of them, and then we're asking them to lead us from darkness to light, from untruth to truth, and from death to immortality. And then we're doing a whole mudra sequence, which is hand gestures along with those mantras. So that'll be like kind of the beginnings or how we open practice. So very specific ways to open and close our practice, whatever it is. And then 2 of our months, we have a whole month dedicated to Shakti and diving into her. And I will be giving a sadhana or practice with mantra and yantra and one of my favorite deities. There's a hint behind me. And then we have a whole month with Shiva as well. And what's really fun is that we're ending this whole 6 months with our last month being Dharma. And Dharma, in a traditional sense, is this kind of like right action or really walking life in this spiritual, awakened kind of way. But I feel, and oftentimes we translate it in the West, that it has to do with our kind of life purpose or our gifts that we're offering into the world. And so we're going to use kind of all of these stages to blossom even deeper into what it is here that we are here to give, and why and how and what that looks like in the context of Living Tantra and the Shakti priestess, even if what that is for you doesn't connect directly to these lineages. So that's kind of the whole journey. And again, the link, I think Samsara will put in the chat, Temple of Shakti. We begin on the 31st, so it's very soon. I'm not sure when I'll run the program again, but I do have scholarship opportunities, so there is, you can reach out to me directly, and maybe Samsara can put my email in there, halo@shaktitemplearts.com. So there's scholarship opportunities. We have a free webinar again next week where we're going to be doing a bit more practice. It's called Temple Arts of the Shakti Priestess. That is free. And we're going to have a little special coupon code for those who join that webinar as well. And right now we do have a sign up with a sister deal. So if you join with a friend, which I think is always more fun anyways, you both will get $250 off the full cost. And then you can also find on the course, if you go to my landing page, I have a full free little 6-part mini course. So you get a taste for all the different months and modules. And so you can just get that for free. And I think that's enough to say. The website says more. You're welcome to reach out to me. You can also find me. I'm mostly active on Instagram, so you can also find me there at Shakti Temple Arts, and there's all kinds of goodies there. And I think that's it. Any questions about that?
I think we're good. We're
All
good.
right.
So as Halo said, we have posted down below in the comments all the websites on how to learn more information about Temple of Shakti and the other offerings that come from Shakti Temple Arts. And I also put the contact information of Halo's email down below, as well as the handle for her Instagram if you'd like to reach her out there. Thank you, every single one of you that have joined us today in Living Tantra. We saw people that were from the Netherlands, Salt Lake City, New York City. It's really great to see this global family coming together to just expand and learn more on how we can connect to ourselves, to each other, and to the world. And thank you so much, Halo, for coming on and sharing this beautiful information and diving deep into Tantra. We learned a lot today.
Yay.
So feel free to contact Halo on all of these modalities that are available below if you'd like to learn more. And if you'd like to learn more about Soulmatique Intelligence in our offerings of movement, you can check out our website at www.soulmatiqueintelligence.com. You'll see the link as well in the description. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
One last thing. This beautiful woman over here, Samsara, is going to be with us in Temple of Shakti. So I am just thrilled about that. And that's just going to bring so much more Shakti to the mix. So. Thank you so much.
Yes, I'm going to be joining the container. We have a group of some really incredible women who are ready to step into their power, what their superhuman, superwoman power is. So join us into this container towards the end of January. And yeah, thank you everybody for joining us. And
thank you so much.
We will see you all next time on Unify. Bye-bye, everybody.